Have you ever given your heart, your loyalty, and the best years of your life to a company, only to be dismissed like you were nothing but a line on a spreadsheet? Have you ever wondered what happens when the quiet, overlooked employee, the one who carried the weight in silence, finally decides not to stay quiet anymore? Would you forgive, or would you let the rules speak louder than the people who humiliated you? I want to share my story with you, a story filled with betrayal, anger, and justice disguised as consequence. Now I ask you to take a moment, stay with me, and listen to the truths I have carried in silence for too long. My name is Melissa Grant. I am 37 years old, and for 14 years I worked as a senior compliance officer at Summit Dynamics, a defense technology contractor headquartered in Arlington, Virginia. I grew up in a quiet town outside of Richmond, and I was the first in my family to step into the world of federal contracts and regulatory compliance. I never imagined I would spend over a decade weaving my name into the fabric of projects that kept satellites in orbit, secure communications alive, and defense systems running without interruption. My job was not glamorous, but it was vital, and I carried it with pride because I believed that when the government trusted us, it was my responsibility to ensure we never failed them. I worked long nights, holidays, and weekends, building a reputation for diligence and calm under pressure. That was who I was when I walked into the atrium that Tuesday morning, unaware that my career was about to be dismissed with a smile. The atrium at Summit Dynamics was designed like a stage, with glass walls, polished stone floors, and a staircase that curved down like a theater prop. They called us there with barely an hour's notice. I joined about 60 of my colleagues, engineers, analysts, and administrators, all lined up in folding chairs with the glare of fluorescent lights bouncing off the chrome fixtures. At the front of the room, standing under a mounted banner that read, "Bold New Future," was Travis Coleman, our newly installed Chief Executive Officer. He was 39, polished, and full of the artificial confidence that photographs well but never survive scrutiny. Cameras were set up on tripods, and an HR representative tapped her microphone twice before giving him the stage. He began with a bright smile and the kind of chirping voice better suited to a product launch. "Today marks a new chapter for Summit Dynamics," he declared, his tone rising like he was announcing a wedding toast. "We are making bold decisions for transparency and accountability, and we want everyone to feel included in our journey." I sat in the third row, my notebook balanced on my lap, my stomach tight as his words floated across the room. He spoke about efficiency, agility, and the need to refresh our talent stack, that cold phrase executives use when they mean cutting people. Then he paused, looked down at a sheet of paper in his hand, and began reading names. The first was a software lead I had mentored 5 years earlier. The second was a project analyst who had just bought her first home. Then he said my name. "Melissa Grant," he announced with a smile that did not touch his eyes. "We thank her for her years of service, but as we look ahead, we must continue to innovate." The sound of my own name being read out like a line in a program hit me like ice water. For a moment, I could not breathe. My colleagues turned their heads toward me, some with pity, some with relief that it was not them. I felt my face grow hot, but I did not move. 14 years of work reduced to a sentence read by a man who had been in the building less than 6 months. The atrium was silent except for the polite coughs of HR staff standing near the cameras. Someone in the back of the room began to clap, and a ripple of hesitant applause followed, forced and uncomfortable. One person even whispered, "You will bounce back," as though this was a sports injury, not the end of a career. I stared straight ahead, refusing to give Travis or the cameras the satisfaction of a reaction. My hands tightened around the notebook until my knuckles ached, but I held still. I had always believed in quiet strength, and in that moment, silence was my shield. Inside, however, something shifted. It was not only humiliation, though that burned deep, but also something sharper, something colder, the kind of resentment that builds in a person who has spent years carrying burdens only to be told she is unnecessary. They thought they could end my story in front of an audience. What they did not realize was that my story had just taken a new turn. I did not know the full shape of it yet, but as I rose from my chair and accepted the cardboard box from HR, I felt a strange calm settle in my chest. I was dismissed in public, labeled as outdated, treated like a relic in a company I had safeguarded for over a decade. But even as I walked out of the atrium, I already knew they had underestimated me. The walk from the atrium to the elevator felt strangely quiet, like I was moving underwater. My colleagues avoided eye contact, shuffling back to their desks as if silence could protect them from being the next name read aloud. HR handed me a cardboard box and a branded pen as though that could soften the blow. I carried the box carefully, my face calm, but my mind raced. 14 years of late nights, carefully written reports, and relentless audits had ended with a single line from a man who had no idea what my job truly meant. I pressed the elevator button and stepped inside alone. The doors slid shut, cutting me off from the fluorescent glare and the hollow clapping behind me. That was the moment the silence broke, and my heart began to hammer. The truth is, I had always known this day could come. Compliance officers like me are often invisible until something goes wrong. I had built my entire career at Summit Dynamics making sure nothing ever went wrong. Every contract we held with the Department of Defense, every satellite communications project, every research initiative tagged as sensitive or dual use had my name printed in the compliance charter as the compliance officer of record. It was not ceremonial. It was not optional. It was federal law. And federal law has teeth. I opened my phone and tapped the secure application I had used 1,000 times before to sign off on oversight reports. Two-step authentication blinked across the screen. Biometric thumb scan. Passphrase. The system recognized me, as it always had, and opened to the main portal. There it was. Form 1916C, status change for compliance officer of record. I had trained new hires on what it meant. I had explained the consequences in countless workshops. But no one in that boardroom had remembered, or perhaps they had never cared to learn. The rule was simple. If the compliance officer leaves employment, voluntarily or otherwise, the organization has 24 hours to notify the oversight agency. If that notification is not made, the system itself issues a mandatory stop work order. That order freezes every project tied to federal funding until a new officer is legally installed. And the key detail was this: reinstatement requires the signature of the existing officer. Without it, the system treats the role as vacant, and penalties begin immediately. I knew those penalties. They were brutal, measured not in days or weeks, but in dollars per hour. My thumb hovered over the screen for only a second. Then I tapped submit. A warning message appeared in bold text. This action will initiate a stop work order across all contracts requiring active compliance oversight. Penalties will apply. Confirm? My chest rose and fell once, steady, and I pressed confirm. The screen refreshed with a new status. Session logged. Notification dispatched. Action recorded. In that moment, I felt a strange calm spread through me. Not joy, not even relief, but the certainty of justice. I had not sabotaged anything. I had not broken a single rule. I had followed the law exactly as it was written. They had dismissed me in public, reduced me to a line in a speech, but the system still recognized me as the keystone. Without me, they would bleed. The elevator doors opened to the parking garage, and I stepped out with my box. A cool wind hit my face as though the world outside had been waiting. I placed the box in my car, sat behind the wheel, and let out a long breath. Above me, in glass offices and polished boardrooms, they still believed I was gone, irrelevant, finished. But the truth was that I had just pressed a button that would unravel their empire. They wanted a bold new beginning. I had just given them one. When I got home that evening, I set the cardboard box on my kitchen table and ignored it. The framed photo of my first team at Summit Dynamics leaned against a stapler. My old coffee mug rattled inside like a bell, and a few files sat on top that no one had even bothered to check before handing over. I poured myself tea, sat down in my robe, and opened my laptop out of habit, though I knew I no longer had access to the company network. That was fine. I did not need to watch the fire I had lit. The system was already moving, quiet and precise. Federal compliance does not sleep. The first notification had gone out within minutes of my submission, a digital whisper to the oversight agency that the compliance officer of record had been terminated without transfer. That whisper carried more weight than any angry speech I could have made in the atrium. It was law, and law does not negotiate. By early morning, the ripples began. A former colleague sent me a message from her personal phone. "Hey, Melissa, are you hearing anything about Project Orion being locked? Nobody can log in." I did not reply, but I already knew. The oversight system had flipped its switches. By 8:45, engineers on the East Coast discovered that their secure cloud access had been flagged non-compliant. At 9:15, a project manager tried to reassure his team that it was just a technical glitch, but his words rang hollow because the red banner across their compliance dashboard did not disappear. It spread. By 10:30, half the federal projects were paralyzed, developers staring at error messages that all said the same thing. Stop work order. Compliance officer of record status vacant. No further action authorized. Inside the company's headquarters, Slack channels started to buzz. Screenshots circulated. Frantic questions piled up. Does anyone know what is going on with Atlas? Why are all my tickets frozen? Who approved this status change? No one had an answer because the answer was me, sitting at my kitchen table with steam curling from my teacup. At exactly 12:12 p.m., a plain email from the Federal Oversight Office arrived in the General Counsel's inbox. I know this because an old friend forwarded me the sanitized version later. The subject line was short: compliance status revoked. The body contained a single sentence: your organization is no longer considered compliant for federal or defense-linked contracts under regulation titles 48 and 32. Attached was a PDF, cold and clinical, outlining fines of $80,000 per hour, already ticking from the moment my form had been logged the previous evening. That first day alone, the penalty meter passed nearly $2 million. Meetings were canceled, engineers pulled from active development, and managers instructed teams to document current activities, which was corporate language for sit still while we panic. I pictured Travis Coleman in his glass office, staring at the numbers and wondering how a woman he called outdated could cripple his bold new future with one simple form. They had clapped when I was dismissed. Now they would sit in silence, waiting for a miracle that was never coming without me. By the next morning, the chaos inside Summit Dynamics had shifted from confusion to full panic. I did not need to be there to see it. Word traveled fast, even to those of us already cast aside. Former colleagues texted in whispers, carefully worded like they were afraid their messages would be monitored. "Melissa, did you know your name is still showing up on the compliance dashboard?" Another wrote, "They keep saying it is a system bug, but nothing is working." It was not a bug. It was the way the rules were written, the way I had spent 14 years making sure every contract aligned with the federal handbook down to the smallest clause. The rules were not suggestions. They were law, and I was still the designated compliance officer of record until I said otherwise. Inside the boardroom, I am told the first emergency meeting lasted 3 hours. The CTO insisted that IT could fix the issue by overriding access or restoring backups. Legal shut him down before he could finish. They had pulled the compliance charter from the archives, a document so dry most executives had never read past the first page. But buried in the fine print was the sentence that froze the room. Only the named compliance officer of record may certify, modify, or deactivate the company's federal compliance status. It was not transferable. It was not provisional. And most important, it was not optional. In that instant, they realized the truth. They had not simply fired an administrator. They had fired the keystone that held the entire arch of their federal contracts in place. Remove the keystone and the arch collapses. The general counsel, Victor Chen, explained it as calmly as he could, but no amount of steady tone could soften the blow. Every project tied to the Department of Defense, every aerospace subcontract, every satellite initiative now sat in violation because the one person legally authorized to approve them was no longer in the building. My name was inked into every agreement. My signature was the bridge between their contracts and compliance. And now that bridge had been pulled up, leaving them stranded. Travis Coleman, thus the new CEO, reportedly slammed his fist on the table. He blamed IT for not predicting this. He blamed HR for mishandling the separation. He even blamed the legal team for not drafting a backup plan. But blaming did not change the fact that every hour cost them $80,000, and the fines were stacking higher than their weekly payroll. Someone in that meeting must have whispered the question that hung heavy in the air. "Can we just appoint someone else?" The answer came quickly. No. Appointment requires written confirmation from the existing officer. Written, voluntary, and unambiguous. Without it, the system treats every attempt as an unauthorized modification, which carries its own penalties. That was the moment the panic turned personal. My phone began buzzing with calls from unfamiliar numbers, emails from polite assistants, even a blocked voicemail from Travis himself. I let them all sit unanswered. I did not need to explain what they had already learned the hard way. They thought I was disposable, a line item to be refreshed. Now they understood. I was not a line item. I was the law wrapped in flesh and bone, and they had built their empire on my signature. By the third day, the tone of their outreach changed. The first calls had been polite, cautious, as if I were simply a former employee they wanted to clarify a small oversight with. But once the board realized what the compliance charter truly meant, the politeness cracked into something raw, something closer to desperation. My phone lit up like a fire alarm, buzzing with numbers I did not recognize. At first, I silenced them. Then, out of curiosity, I let one voicemail play. It was from Carla Henderson, the head of Human Resources, a woman who had stood on that atrium stage with a fixed smile while my name was read out. Her voice was shaky now. "Melissa, this is Carla. We may have mishandled the separation process. I would really appreciate if we could have a quick conversation to correct some paperwork. Please call me back today." "Paperwork," she said, as though a federal stop work order could be corrected with a form stapled in triplicate. A few hours later, another voicemail arrived, this one from Victor Chen, the general counsel. His tone was different, less pleading, more deliberate, but underneath it was fear. Melissa, I want to assure you that we are treating your departure as a miscommunication. We are prepared to discuss reinstatement, benefits, even a consulting role, if you are willing to help us resolve this compliance gap. He spoke carefully, like every word was being transcribed, because he knew the truth. Without me, every hour the fines continued. By the end of that day, the total had passed $5 million. Then came the one I had been waiting for. The blocked number. I let it roll to voicemail and sat with my tea as I listened to Travis Coleman's voice, the man who had smiled while discarding me in front of 60 colleagues. He tried to sound calm, but the edges of panic leaked through. Melissa, this is Travis. I understand emotions are high, but we are all professionals here. You need to consider the damage this is doing, not only to the company but to your former coworkers. Contracts, jobs, families. This is bigger than one person. Call me back, and we can make this right. The audacity made me laugh out loud. He had humiliated me in public, treated me like excess baggage, and now he was asking me to save him for the sake of the people he had also dismissed as numbers on a spreadsheet. I did not call any of them back. I left every message on unread, every call unanswered. The fines ticked on, relentless as a clock in a silent room. Every hour they failed to reach me was another $80,000 lost. My silence was not petty. It was precise. I had no need to argue, no need to scream, no need to beg for dignity in front of cameras. The law was on my side, and the law did not bend to pleading voicemails. For the first time in years, I felt the power shift settle into my hands, quiet, steady, unshakable. By Thursday morning, the silence inside Summit Dynamics had shattered. I was not in the building, but I could almost hear the storm through the whispers that reached me from former colleagues who still trusted me more than they trusted leadership. The first federal partner to act was the Department of Transportation, which suspended a satellite navigation upgrade worth nearly $12 million. The notice was brief and cold, citing active non-compliance with oversight protocols and halting all payments until the issue was resolved. For years, I had worked to make sure language like that never appeared in our inbox. Now it was there in black and white, and there was nothing they could do to erase it. The suspension sent a shockwave through the upper floors. Alan Myers, the CFO, circulated an internal memo that same afternoon with numbers no one wanted to see. In less than 36 hours, fines had already reached $3.2 million. By end of day, they would be over $4 million. If the suspension of contracts continued into the weekend, projected losses would exceed $10 million. Alan was a man who lived and breathed balance sheets, calm and steady, but my source told me his left eye twitched through the entire emergency meeting. When finance people start twitching, you know the foundation is cracking. Aerospace Partners followed next. A subcontractor in Nevada invoked their breach clause with language that was both polite and lethal. Due to the federal stop work order in effect, all activities under Contract 442B are suspended. Liquidated damages shall apply per Section 9.4. Translation: you failed compliance, now you owe us. Those damages were set at $200,000 per day. I imagine Travis reading that line, his polished confidence dissolving as the numbers stacked higher and higher. This was no longer about internal panic. It was about outside partners cutting ties to protect themselves. I poured another cup of tea as the updates reached me secondhand. Teams were pulled from active projects and told to review documentation, which was corporate code for sit idle while executives beg for a miracle. The Slack channels inside the company had turned into digital shouting matches, developers arguing with product managers, managers begging IT for fixes, IT insisting their hands were tied. Screenshots made their way to me, bright red warnings stamped across dashboards. Non-compliant, no action authorized. Responsible officer vacant. They could reboot servers, clear caches, and curse at the screens, but the system only responded with silence. That night, another memo leaked. This one marked urgent. Alan Myers had updated his running tally of penalties, and the subject line told the story better than the body. Fines accruing at $80,000 per hour. Immediate action required. Beneath it was a live counter, ticking upward minute by minute. I stared at the screenshot for a long time, not gloating, not laughing, just breathing steady. They had chosen to humiliate me, to discard me like I was irrelevant. But now, the truth was written in every dollar draining from their accounts. I had not raised my voice. I had not made a scene. I had simply followed the rules they ignored. And the rules were tearing them apart. By Friday morning, I felt something I had not felt in years. Calm. The company that had humiliated me was spinning out of control, but in my little apartment the air was still. Sunlight stretched across the kitchen table where my untouched cardboard box still sat. I opened my laptop, not to watch the chaos, but to tend to something I had neglected for far too long. My own future. My cursor hovered over my LinkedIn profile. For 14 years, it had listed Senior Compliance Officer, Summit Dynamics, a title I had worn like a badge, even when it went unnoticed. With one long breath, I deleted it. In its place, I typed Independent Compliance Consultant, Federal Risk Strategy, Defense and Dual-Use Systems. Then I added one clean sentence to my summary. Currently open to select engagements. Within minutes of hitting save, the views on my profile doubled. By noon, I had received 2 messages from recruiters. By evening, I had 5 emails from contractors, all worded differently but carrying the same undertone. Urgency. One of them wrote, "If you are the COR everyone is whispering about, we need to talk." Whispering. That word stuck with me. For years, I had been invisible, working in the shadows to keep projects safe, compliant, untouchable. Now, my name was spreading through quiet conversations, private calls, and back-channel emails. For the first time, my work was not background noise. It was the headline. Meanwhile, Summit Dynamics was bleeding. Another colleague, one I had mentored years ago, messaged me late that afternoon. "Melissa, everyone is terrified. Projects are stalled, meetings are collapsing, people are updating their resumes. Nobody knows what to do without you." I read the words, then set my phone down. They were only realizing now that the quiet woman they ignored in meetings, the one who sat with binders and contracts, was the spine of their empire. It was not arrogance that filled me. It was something colder and steadier. The recognition that I had built leverage without even meaning to. They had cut me out thinking I was redundant, and in doing so, they had revealed just how irreplaceable I was. By Saturday morning, more emails came in, this time from private defense contractors and aerospace startups. They did not care about Summit Dynamics' meltdown. They cared about the fact that I had been the keystone holding it all together. They wanted that keystone for themselves. I sipped my tea, reading each offer carefully. Some dangled high consulting rates, others hinted at long-term roles with benefits far better than what I had ever been offered before. It was almost surreal. Just days earlier, I had been dismissed in front of 60 people as if my career was a relic. Now the market was proving the opposite. I was valuable, I was visible, and I was in control. For the first time in my professional life, I was not patching leaks for executives who treated me like wallpaper. I was steering my own ship. And as Summit Dynamics continued to drown under the weight of their own arrogance, I was quietly rising. Calm, steady, and untouchable. By the start of the next week, the panic inside Summit Dynamics had turned into desperation. The polite phone calls and careful voicemails gave way to offers that grew larger by the hour. First, Carla Henderson from HR sent me a neatly worded email with the subject line, Reinstatement Proposal. It promised a temporary 60-day contract at my old salary plus a 20% increase. She framed it as an opportunity to help smooth the transition and restore compliance. I read it once, closed my laptop, and let it sit unanswered. A raise meant nothing when the same people had just dismissed me in public like I was obsolete. The following day, Victor Chen, the general counsel, tried a different approach. He called from his personal number, his voice low, measured, careful. Melissa, the board is prepared to discuss a consulting agreement at triple your previous salary, remote work, full discretion. All we need is your cooperation and a few key signatures. His words were smoother, but I could hear the tremor beneath them. Triple my pay, he said, as though money alone could erase the memory of being stripped of my dignity in front of my peers. I did not answer him either. I forwarded the voicemail to my attorney instead. Then came the threats. A colleague slipped me a copy of a leaked internal memo marked confidential. It outlined the board's options in cold legal terms. The sentence that made me sit back in my chair read, "Resolution hinges on securing her cooperation. Explore legal containment if necessary." Containment. The word chilled me at first, but then it almost made me laugh. They had boxed me in for 14 years. Keeping me quiet, keeping me small, and now they wanted to contain me when they were the ones bleeding millions by the hour. Their arrogance was astonishing. By Wednesday, the CEO himself, Travis Coleman, tried again. This time he sent an assistant to deliver a written letter to my home. It was heavy with corporate phrasing, unexpected regulatory turbulence, and good faith resolution, but the heart of it was clear. They wanted me back, even if only for a few weeks, even if only to sign papers. The letter dangled benefits, bonuses, even a promise to rebuild trust. Not once did it mention the way they had humiliated me in the atrium. Not once did it acknowledge the cameras or the clapping or the cardboard box. They wanted my signature without giving me back my dignity. I set the letter aside and poured myself another cup of tea. Their offers, their threats, their hollow promises. They all revealed the same truth. They still believed I could be swayed, that I would return to save the empire that had discarded me. But they were wrong. Every hour they failed to understand that truth. $80,000 drained from their accounts. I did not need to raise my voice. I did not need to lift a finger. My silence was enough to make them sweat. By the end of that week, the invitation stopped being optional. A message reached me through an old friend still inside the company. The board was demanding my presence in a private meeting. They did not call it begging, of course. They called it a collaborative discussion, but I knew what it really was. They had run out of options, and now they were turning to the woman they had thrown away like a used pen. I agreed to attend, but on my terms. If they wanted me in the room, I would not rush. The meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock sharp on Monday. I arrived at 10:23. I did not slam the door or announce myself. I simply stepped into the glass-walled boardroom, calm, deliberate, the sound of my heels clicking against the polished floor like a clock they could not stop. Every director turned to look at me. Their eyes did not search my face. They searched my hands. Because they knew. Those hands were the only ones that could sign their salvation. Travis Coleman was mid-rant when I walked in. His voice was high, brittle, as he lashed out at his executives, blaming each of them for the collapse. He stopped the moment he saw me, his expression tightening. "You have no idea the damage you have caused," he snapped, his face flushed with anger. But before he could continue, Victor Chen, the general counsel, rose so quickly his chair scraped the floor. His hand pressed against the table, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Sir, stop. Anything you say now can be construed as coercion. She is the only one who can reinstate compliance." The words landed with a heavy silence. Not our best option. Not one of the options. The only... I set my bag on the table, slowly enough for the sound of the leather to echo in the quiet. I opened a notebook and clicked my pen. I did not look at Travis. I looked at the board chair, at the CFO whose pen had been tapping all morning, at the CEO who could not meet my eyes. I let them sit in silence long enough for every second to burn. Then I slid a single sheet of paper across the table. 3 bullet points, typed in black ink. First, a 7-figure payout wired within 48 hours. Second, full benefits reinstated retroactively, including stock options, retirement, and health coverage. Third, the immediate resignation of CEO Travis Coleman, effective before any reinstatement was filed. There was no wiggle room, no subject to negotiation. At the bottom, I had written one last line in neat block print. Failure to agree will result in formal notice of unwillingness to return under Clause 9A. Reinstatement will be locked for 6 months. I leaned back, folded my hands, and let them read. The CFO stopped tapping. The COO finally raised her head. The board chair leaned forward, eyes fixed on the page like it was the last lifeboat on a sinking ship. Then he said the only words that mattered. "Get it done." The silence that followed the board chair's order was heavy enough to crush glass. Travis Coleman opened his mouth, ready to protest, but no sound came. The chair's gaze pinned him to his seat. Victor Chen, pale but composed, cleared his throat and spoke the words no one wanted to hear. Clause 9A is ironclad. If she files unwillingness to return, reinstatement is blocked for 6 months. There is no appeal, no backdoor, no exception. His voice was steady, but his hands gripped the edge of the table like he was bracing against a storm. Every eye swung back to me. I did not smile, and I did not gloat. I simply picked up the silver pen I had carried for years, the same one I used to sign compliance reports in the quiet of late nights, the same one I had used to trigger the stop work order in that elevator. I twirled it once between my fingers, letting the sound of the metal click punctuate the silence. Then, without ceremony, I signed the reinstatement form that Victor had slid toward me, my signature clean, sharp, unmistakable. I placed the pen down, folded the paper in half, and slid it back across the polished wood table. For a moment, no one moved. Then the board chair nodded to Victor, who scooped up the form like it was a life preserver. Travis's face was a study in defeat. Jaw clenched, eyes burning, the color draining from his cheeks. He knew what was coming next. My paper had made it clear. His resignation was not a request. It was a condition. The board did not argue. They did not debate. They had already lost too much money to gamble further. By the end of the day, a quiet press release would be drafted. Bland corporate language about leadership transitions and new opportunities, but everyone in that room knew the truth. His career ended with the stroke of my pen. I rose from my chair, slow and deliberate, slid my notebook into my bag, and turned toward the door. No handshakes, no farewells, no concessions. Just the steady click of my heels on the floor. When the door closed behind me, it was not just the end of a meeting. It was the end of an illusion. For years, they had treated me as replaceable, background noise in an empire of glass and chrome. But I had been the keystone all along, the one piece they could not remove without the entire structure collapsing. They realized it too late, and the price had already been paid. That night, I logged into my LinkedIn again. 3 new offers waited, this time from competitors who had heard whispers of what happened inside Summit Dynamics. One message read simply, "We saw the news. If you are available, we would like to meet immediately." I closed the laptop and poured myself a glass of wine. For 14 years, I had been the safety net. Now, I was the gatekeeper. They had handed me a cardboard box, but I had walked away holding every card. And in the end, that was the sweetest revenge of all. When I look back now, I realize this was never just about contracts, penalties, or the fall of a CEO. It was about dignity, about the quiet power we hold when others underestimate us. The lesson is simple. Never let anyone tell you that you are replaceable, because sometimes the very thing they dismiss is the keystone that holds everything together. What about you? Have you ever been overlooked, underestimated, or pushed aside only to discover your worth in the end? Share your thoughts in the comments, because stories like this are not just mine. They belong to anyone who has been silenced and found their voice again. And if my story inspired you, follow Revenge Vault for more, because sometimes the sweetest victories are born from the quietest beginnings.